Why do I look like an airline hostess? The topic of race and using the race card has featured on this channel more times than I can count, almost exclusively by virtue of Queen of the race card herself, Meghan Markle. But given the sensitive nature of this topic, and because I know there will probably be most likely people of color attacking me in the comment section for not understanding what I'm talking about, allow me to make a disclaimer. I am Caucasian, but in Australia, due to my olive skin and my darker features, I am referred to as ethnic, and I am really sad to say that throughout the years since I've been here, I have had more than a few nasty and entirely uncalled for racist comments thrown my way. So trust me when I say that I'm not some privileged, light-skinned person who doesn't know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of something as despicable as racism. Which is why I feel so strongly when the likes of Meghan Markle, most famously, but of course she's not the only one, hijack the anti-racism movement and diminish it, belittle it with their incessant and flippant use of the race card, even when the situation clearly has nothing to do with race. And by the way, on that note, if you're someone who still believes at this point that people hate Meghan Markle because they're racist, then the cross mark is right over there. Just hit it and click out of this video because it's not for you. This video was inspired by three things in particular. Firstly, at this point, I've read numerous books on Meghan Markle and Prince Harry and the royal family in general. And one thing that all of these sources have in common is the understanding and clear acknowledgement that Meghan Markle's race was not only seen as a boon by the royal family, but it also served as a shield and a weapon to either soften the blow and deflect or attack. It was a reason for her to be seen and treated as special. It was certainly used by her and also by the staff to let her get away with things, but it was also a threat in her arsenal for her to use against anyone who didn't go along with whatever she wanted. And interestingly, when you delve back into Meghan's history, you'll see that this behavior surfaced long before she'd even met Prince Harry. There are, for example, various interviews where she explains that, in her opinion, the reason that she struggled so long to land roles in Hollywood is because she was biracial and they just didn't know where to place her. So it wasn't her painfully obvious lack of acting ability, oh no, which, mind you, unlike her race, she actually had the opportunity to seriously consider and work on, but instead, in true Markle fashion, she chose to continue to blame external forces for her own failures. But of course, whenever she was successful at something or good at something, it had nothing to do with her race or her outward appearance, and everything to do with her intellect and skill and abilities. So having seen this context to her personality and her attitude, it wasn't surprising at all to find out that she carried that attitude with her into the royal family, where she knew full well, particularly due to the monarchy's imperialist history, that everyone would tread extra carefully around her to keep her happy, but more importantly, to make sure the race card is kept at bay, because they knew all too well and very early on that it wasn't beneath her to use it. When you repeatedly use the same weapon as a shield, weapon, shield, weapon, shield, weapon, shield, eventually it goes blunt. And that's what's been happening to the likes of Meghan Markle over the past couple of years. Because what was once seen as an explosive allegation is now something that people roll their eyes at. And that's not because we're all becoming desensitized to racism or we're all racist and we don't care what happens to people of color, but it's because the allegations themselves turned out to be entirely unfounded. We all know that everything has spectacularly backfired in both Meghan and Harry's faces, and they've both since retracted the allegations themselves. But of course, not after accepting an award for standing up to the non-existent racism that Meghan was subjected to. Which brings me to this Target wannabe pop star. The second inspiration is this video that was going around social media of this large group of people of color, I believe they refer to themselves as brown people, led by what the New York Post has described as a wannabe pop star who is trying to make it big. There's nothing wrong with trying to make it big. But they were performing a choreographed dance at a Target store for a self-produced music video. Since they never sought permission to do this, they were asked to leave by a Target employee, which prompted this wannabe pop star to scream, not literally, metaphorically, on the internet, racism. That whole dance routine wasn't scheduled in advance. They never called in and got permission. They just randomly showed up and started dancing as though it was their father's basement. Now, it's important to understand that businesses like Target have policies. And in Target's case, they have a policy which explicitly states that if you want to film on their premises, you must select the particular store you want to film at and then request a visit or an interview with the leader on duty. Something which this wannabe pop star and her posse clearly didn't do. And from a legal and commercial standpoint, this is common practice. Every single business has their own set of rules and regulations that they can enforce legally on their premises, as long as, of course, they don't violate the laws of the state or territory that they operate in. For example, by being discriminatory, which is exactly what this singer tried to go with. But did it work? If anything good has come out of the whole Markle racist debacle, it's the fact that it shone a light on people who unjustly pull the race card and use it as a shield against very valid criticism for their wrongdoing, or who use it as a weapon to attack anyone who dares criticize said wrongdoing. So in this instance, I am very happy to report that this singer's attempt at garnering whatever it is she wanted, attention, sympathy, both, clout, didn't go too well because people just aren't having it. If anything, she's losing support and has made a mockery out of herself and her friends with her in the video, just like her predecessor, Markle. So faith in humanity, minimally restored. Finally comes a topic that I've wanted to discuss for a long time, but I've never really been able to squeeze it into a video before. And this one to me isn't as clear cut, so I would appreciate it if you were to chime in and discuss in the comment section. As a starting point, I think we can all agree, at least I hope we can, that white people can be victims of racism too. You know, racism is racism. And if we're going to move away from it, then we should fully commit to moving away from it. But what's troubling is that somehow, somewhere along the line, a loud minority of people have decided that it's okay to be openly racist towards white people. A blatant example of this took place quite recently, a few months ago, during the king's coronation, when an actress, a black woman, commented that the British royal family on the balcony were terribly white.
We've gone from the rich diversity of the Abbey to a terribly white balcony. I'm very struck by that.
Which I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that the language and the thought process behind that statement are problematic, to say the least. I mean, it's a family. They're all related to some extent, and they're all white. Since when was being a Caucasian family a terrible thing? Was it perhaps a comment on how Meghan Markle was notably absent? Well, first of all, Meghan is as light as I am, when she's not doused in layers and layers of self-tanner? And secondly, who told her to leave? Certainly not the royal family, certainly not the Queen, who tried her hardest to convince them to stay and also gave them that 12-month review period hoping they would come back. And certainly not the men in gray suits who bent over backwards to accommodate their every need, including their Megxit demands, which the Queen had to step in and veto. But more importantly, I think we can all imagine the backlash, the uproar, and the calls for canceling the actress had she been a white woman who said the exact same thing about an all-black royal family. And yes, there is a historical context here that we can't ignore. But two wrongs don't make a right. Even if the actress in question didn't really mean for it to come across that way, which is what she said later when she apologized, had she been white, I don't believe that a simple apology or explanation or correction would have sufficed. And the fact that this language is being normalized in the media is a dangerous indication that we are heading down a very divisive path. Which brings me to this Glamour magazine article. If you haven't heard about Lucy Letby, well, first of all, consider yourself fortunate, because it's a horrific case about a horrific monster who is now thankfully behind bars. If you want to look her up on your own time, feel free to do so. Might give you this video more context later on, but I certainly won't be going into any detail about her. All you need to know for the purposes of this video is that she is a convicted serial killer, and she is a youngish, I believe she's in her mid-30s, white woman. Now, this article was written by Nadine Asbali, who to me appears to be a Caucasian Arab woman based on her name, who also happens to be Muslim. And I'm telling you this just to give you context about the author, because I think context will matter in this situation. Now, the headline itself is very strongly worded, and it conveys very astutely what the entire article is about. Lucy Letby's white privilege helped her commit murders in plain sight. And yes, she's still benefiting from it. White women are shrouded in a veneer of fragility that protects them even when they are in the wrong. And it's this subtitle that instantly grabbed my attention, because the whole concept of women, and not necessarily white women, being shrouded in a veneer of fragility is the entire reason for the existence of this channel. Years ago, when I was very young and I had just met my current partner, Zach, he was also very young, but by that time, he had already experienced years of stalking, harassment, and even sexual assault, all because he'd rejected a woman who was obsessed with him. When I came along, most of that behavior, minus the sexual assault, then transferred over to me. And so we were both on the receiving end of this behavior being perpetrated by a female. Now, I learned from that experience, both as a young woman and as a lawyer, that female perpetrators of violence just aren't taken seriously, not by society and not even by the authorities. So I have my own bias, I suppose, approaching this topic. And I'm not going to read the whole article to you, but I will link it in the description box if you want to read it for yourself. But the gist of it is that the author is fed up with what she sees as society's problematic and inaccurate depiction of white women being celestial beings who wouldn't even hurt a fly. Because what had happened was that Lucy, being such a woman, basically operated in plain sight for the better part of a year. And even when her colleagues raised the alarm, they were then made to apologize to her for accusing her of such things before the truth eventually came out. And so the author argues that this would never have happened had Lucy been a woman of color, for example, a woman with a foreign name, or a woman that practices a certain religion, like Islam. And what stood out to me is how angry the author seems to be, or perhaps I should say how indignant she seems to be. And it makes me wonder whether, like me, when it comes to female perpetrators, she's speaking from personal experience. Now, while I can't speak for the motivations of this author, I don't know if she's racist or not. I can say that the article itself doesn't seem to be accusing all women or painting all white women with the same brush and saying that they're all capable of doing what Lucy Letby did. To me, the author seems to be attacking the way that society responds when such a woman is accused of such a heinous crime, which has been my experience with calling out evil or criminal women. I'm not claiming that all women are evil and criminal, but I do have a problem with the way society plays everything down when it's being perpetrated by a female. But that doesn't make me a misogynist. And if people out there think it does, well then that means everyone who's called out Harvey Weinstein and the likes of him is a misandrist. Towards the end of the article, the author does acknowledge that people may accuse her of racializing what is an isolated, horrific offense. But she goes on to insist that it was a factor, and a major one at that. So a question for you is, do you agree? Does society think that white women in particular are flawless angels who wouldn't hurt a fly? Or do you, like me, think that it's more of a gender issue rather than a racial one? Or could it perhaps be both? I have a sneaking suspicion that all of our answers are going to differ because this is a situation that is most definitely going to be colored by personal experiences. And that's it. Just something for you to ponder over the weekend, I guess, because you have nothing better to do than ponder my questions. See ya.